Hello, everyone, and I am disproportionately nervous. I used to do quite a lot of speaking, haven't done much for ages, and yeah, it's showing in my nerves. Thanks for coming along, and thanks to Jonathan and Nathan for putting on the exhibition. It's just so good. I was so chuffed when I got an email saying that I'd be included, and chuffed because the work that's hanging, I really wanted to be shown for many reasons, which will become clear in a moment. But yeah, I'm Jen, and I've called this a rather wiggly journey, which, well, I think everyone's journey is wiggly, isn't it, really? But yeah, I started. Oh, hang on. Now, where that's it. I kind of put this slide up, and I have put some words on just because I wanted to kind of locate myself and give my, a bit of context because what we make is obviously where we come from. And I I started painting when I was 15. That picture of me at the top right there is 1987, and I was given some big tubes of paint and some massive boards by my art teacher, and I kind of just immersed myself and really took to painting, and I think my art teacher was quite surprised, and I basically painted for the next 3 years at school but didn't go to art college. And I think the thing is, the reason this is important now when I look back on it, I kind of know why. And I think the neurodiversity stuff, it wasn't talked about back then. We're talking about, 1980s. I was just one of several slightly weird people at school, and hard, capable, but a little bit odd, which I never knew really until I spoke to a friend a few years ago. She said, "Well, Jen, you're always the strange one." I'm like, "Oh, was I? I didn't really know that." But anyway, but I didn't go to art college, and I think at the time people were quite surprised. But I wasn't encouraged. I didn't know how to apply. I came from a family where no one had been to university, and my parents were kind of working class jobs, didn't have any knowledge of university or college or the arts at all. And I'd kind of got this firm belief that art wasn't a real job. And if you studied art, you only basically the job there was an art teacher. And much as I love my art teacher, and he's still a good friend now, in his 80s, there was no way I wanted to be or do what he did. So, but also I just didn't have the confidence. I was pretty disorganized, and it just kind of applying for a job basically seemed to be what to do. And no one kind of made it a suggestion either. It wasn't talked about. There were some girls that were going off to university. I was at a girls' school, but there was quite a small group going off to university. It wasn't the mainstream thing. And looking back, there were, as I say, the confidence I think was one of the main issues, and the organisation and having the vision of something different. So there's some kind of diversity issues in myself that I can recognise now, but at the time I certainly didn't. So I kind of painted a bit in my 20s and 30s. I think actually these might be more like late 30s actually rather than 20s. I think I was too busy working and trying to figure out what to do with my life in my 20s. I did art when I was in my mid-20s, go and train as an occupational therapist. And that did involve going to uni. And the reason I did that was because I wanted a job that seemed to combine creativity and a real job. But there's not much creativity in occupational therapy. There probably was more if I'd have chosen those particular jobs. But as you can see, I was making quite impressionistic work, I'd say, in my late 20s and early 30s. But I was also became a mum, and time and energy was taken with that. And we moved a lot. I'm from Kent originally, and we didn't land in in Bristol now. But I can see I'd always had a love for Monet, and you can kind of see Monet quite a lot in that, can't you? In the Impressionists. So there was a bit of painting in my 20s and 30s, and then sort of 8 years ago rather, this thing happened, and I'm not going to talk about this much because if you don't know, it was a bit of a weird thing. I ended up being on Sky Arts. I was in the first episode, the first series as a wild card. That's that bottom left image. And interestingly, yes, I'm about 43 there, something like that. Yeah, early 40s. And interestingly, I'd never painted outdoors before, and I absolutely loved it. and one of the judges, I nearly won the wild card that year, but one of the judges sort of said, "Oh my goodness, you can really paint," and I was like, "Oh, well, that's interesting to hear." And I met a lady there, and we decided we'd just come to be wildcards every year. So the next year we were wildcards again. And then suddenly I won a place in a pod, which is the kind of actual kind of people in the competition. And I went on to win the whole thing, which was a bit, yes, it was completely odd. But I can see now again, there was quite a level. I never considered myself competitive until I was in this competition. Quite a high level of obsession came out. Hyper focus, actually, not obsession. Hyper focus, which I can see is one of my strengths. You'll see there's the painting in the middle there is of Felix Docs, and I was so determined to do well. I researched everything so thoroughly, and I even downloaded an app which told me when the shipping containers were coming in, so I had no surprises. I mean, yeah, it was interesting, but also I learned so much about myself as a painter, and there's quite a lot of darkness in these images. They're quite melancholic. There's quite a lot of construction and architecture, which was quite different to like the kind of loose impressionist work I'd been making kind of really before then. So that was quite interesting. And I think I've always been attracted to lines, buildings, metalwork, fences, railings, that sort of thing. I think it's changing now, as you'll see. But anyway, that thing happens. I'm not going to go on about that. But if you want to ask me by email, feel free to ask me stuff. But it really set me on a path. I mean, I ended up being a landscape painter as such, but I'd never considered myself as that. I just thought I was a painter and that was it. And the next few years were really frigging tough, to be fair. People think, you win something like that and you're automatically given this golden ticket to fame and you're going to sell your art everywhere. And I did start selling a lot more art, but at the same time, I started to care for my very elderly parents, and I still am. And had kids. One of my daughters was undiagnosed ADHD and autism, and she failed on school. So I wasn't free to go and be this artist who'd won this major competition, really. So I'm not giving a sob story. It was just probably the hardest few years in some ways, because there were these expectations. I'd get people emailing me saying, "Oh, you must be doing this, that, and the other," and I was making work, so that was good. And these are I've just put these two paintings up, two of my favourite paintings from that first couple of years. And you can see in the right hand one that Oriana there's still quite a lot of architecture in there. I think the competition gave me the confidence to experiment a lot more, but also gave me the confidence that I could finish things, and I knew how to, which I know it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but I think I spent years making stuff and never really knowing how to judge it for its own merit and stop or make decisions. And of course, when you're with the competition, you have to paint 4 hours and you have to have a finished piece. So that skill had to be really honed. So I started to be able to look at my work and be a lot more confident about what to do with it. And as I say, I mean, these are quite large. I'm interestingly, in recent years, I'm not working quite so big, but and that one on the left was 2020, middle of the pandemic. We were in Egypt when it all kicked off. But and something I've learned about myself massively in the last 8 years is every painting is pretty much different. I can't really work in series. Things just basically happen. They have an identity of their own almost every piece. In fact, the work you've got in Elysium at the moment is one of the most consistent bodies that I've made, actually, because I loved Oriana, that picture on the right, and can I kind of make another one in that series? Not a chance. I mean, that painting was sold anyway, and it feels like I did that and then I moved on, which is, people want, I want like one like you made there, or can you make another one like that? No, that's gone. Anyway, let's nip through a bit more, because I came out of this really tough sort of probably 5 years feeling like I needed something different from painting. I needed to start enjoying it again. It had become quite a slog, and there was a lot of pressure. I have a gallery up north, and she doesn't pressurize me, but there was this, you kind of feel the need to feed the gallery as such, and it just wasn't working. So I started to marble bits of paper and canvas, and these kind of are two fairly early experiments with this. So if you don't know what marbling is, it's where you've got a sort of a tray or a bath of water, and you can buy marbling paint, but I loosen oil colour, mix it and loosen it with terps, and then it spreads across the surface of the tray of water, and then you lay paper or canvas or wood on top. I'm laughing because I did some 2 days ago in the garden for the first time in ages. Now the weather's been better. My dog jumped in afterwards and marbled herself. I can't hear any of you. I hope that's funny because I found it funny. So I might have a green and blue dog at the moment. Mouth, and she didn't get it in her mouth, thank goodness. Mouth, chest. Anyway, so if I'm doing a big sheet of something, I've got like a hard-sided paddling pool. And I started to experiment with making smaller interventions, blocking out areas of the marbling, using pareidolia, that thing where you see shapes or faces in things, using that to go, okay, maybe there's a tree there, or maybe there's a river or something, or a face. So I started experimenting, just blocking these areas out, and that's what these two are, some of those early experiments. And getting to know the materials really well. Now, Jonathan, I didn't set a timer, so we're going to have to. You're going to have to tell me how much longer I've got left before if it looks like I'm trundling on too much, just tell me. These are sort of a couple of years ago, 22, 23. Again, the one on the right, Roccolo, you can see the marbling there, and it worked quite differently on that because there was a lot of underpainting with that painting, so it was quite smeary, the marbling. And sometimes I have to sit with these things for quite a long time before I like them. Sometimes I just hate them instantly and wipe it all off. But I know that I was like, no, there's some good things in here. And it was one of the paintings I was really pleased with. And then there was this spell of doing this quite figurative elements and people coming in. Now, I kind of people don't often feature in my work, but these people started appearing. This is kind of like a wedding in the forest. I had some images, I think out of a magazine or something that I worked with, and I had this big marbled sheet of canvas that was the starting point, and I started seeing these characters and took it from there. But it's, again, my gallerist, she's like, oh, everyone loved that painting, Jen. Can we have some more of that? And I'm like, mate, if I could make something the same again, then yeah, great. But it just rarely happens. There's been a couple of similar ilk, but as you'll see, I seem to kind of move on. I come back to things sometimes, which is helpful. And as I say, the work at Elysium is sort of more congruent, a few pieces. And actually, we're coming up to date quite quickly now. These were these are unprimed cardboard that I've dipped in my paddling pool. That was the starting point. Quite large. So these are about 700 wide by meter 0.2. And one of the things I love and hate in equal measure with this technique, I'm using it as a starting point, and sometimes as with these three, there's a minimal intervention. Whereas if I go back, you can see there's a lot more intervention on these. Obviously, the one on the left, there's a lot of overpainting. I've kept some areas of the marbling, but there's a lot more flattened areas and figures come in. And the one on the right, there's more intervention. But these are, they were dipped. I loved the texture and the shapes that came out. They were natural landscapes. I could see that if I made a horizon and a sky, then the land would speak for itself, if that makes sense. The cliffs, the soil, the rocks, the rivers. And I sat with these for a few months, made those interventions in the sky from just overpainting with some light oil paint. And I live in a bit, I know maybe everyone does, but one of the things that happened a few years ago that was really hard, so I lost my mentor of like 11, 12 years, and I didn't have anyone coming to the studio. I didn't have anyone giving me feedback. I was just sitting with this stuff I was making. The only feedback really I was getting was from the gallerist. And with these particular, I knew I loved them, but I didn't know whether they were good enough. That's basically what it was. So come the autumn, I had a one-off session with two mentors because I was trying to find someone to work with, and they both loved them, and I felt encouraged to submit them to it's the John Richardson Residency Prize. So there's a gallery in Ireland called Hambley and Hambley, and I submitted them there. And literally, it was about the day I took some work in to have it framed for Elysium, I found out that they were shortlisted. And do you know what? What with that and the work that's in Elysium, I kind of felt for the first time in years that I'd moved on from this label of landscape artist to actually being a lot more congruent and a lot more honest, and it's an overused word, authentic, but just wanted to make stuff that was quite a bit more me. So these are actually in Ireland at the moment, and I found out the other day that I've won a prize, and I won a 2-week holiday. Well, holiday, I shouldn't call it that. 2-week residency in France in I think it's June. So I can't tell you, and it came a few days after finding out about Elysium. But this process, I think, there's so much trust involved because you just absolutely have so little control. I try and control the variables. I mean, I try and control the colours, obviously, of the paint that I float across the surface. I try and control the support. You can swirl it or you can let the paint sit. You can add less, you can add more, but basically whatever comes out, you've got. And when you're working on an unprimed surface like this, you can't wipe it off. It's very porous. And I quite like the challenge of that, actually, going, looking at it first and going, oh God, I hate that. And then trying to think, okay, but what is there? And I think, working with the unknown has become a bit of a strength because there's so little control in this that I've kind of had to build quite a strong stomach for, oh, well, that was a bit shit, wasn't it? What can we do with it now? That sort of thing. And also kind of sitting with the anxiety of not knowing whether what you've done is any good, but maybe that's most of us. Hey? And then I've just put two of these images that are in Elysium at the moment. And they were starting points. Well, the one on the left was actually dipped as a starting point. So that was on card, similar size to the other ones. And I'd been developing this project called Crackerjack for a while. And it very much was a way of me exploring the neurodiversity side of me and working with it rather than against it. And part of it for me is that everything crowds in at once. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of, I could do this, I could do that. I've got this idea, that idea. And having them all together makes quite a complex image. And one of the thing I wrote, which comes then edited, thankfully, for the show, was explaining all of that. So there's a lot of figures of which are kind of me as a woman, as a neurodiverse woman, and kind of holding on to lots of things, grappling with complexity, a lot of visceral stuff in my body. You can see there's stomach and lungs and and hands. The hands actually were partly people grabbing at me, wanting something from me all the time, because I have quite high caring responsibilities in my life. I do also have a paid job, as most of us do. and it's often a balancing act. So part of this series in Cracker was balancing and holding on to everything and trying not to drop the cabbages and the other items I'm holding on to. And the middle one again is in this series. I hope we're all right for time, Jonathan. We've got a couple more minutes to speak about. This middle image actually started life as a different painting. It was dipped in my paddling pool, which is why there's that curved edge at the top, which is the circle of the pool. And I started working on it. It was a much bigger piece of canvas, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And the other thing that's happened in the last few years is very much process of recycling and going, okay, actually, this would suit that project more. So I had some underpainting which suited this crackerjack project. I could see the cabbages in there. I could see the people, the body parts and the hands. There's a bit of a Gustav Klimt moment going on. There's a bit of a kiss somewhere in there. You can only really see one of the people maybe, but yeah, so actually with that crackerjack project, I mean, there's 6 paintings on show in Elysium, but there's another sort of 3 or 4 in the studio that are kind of part of it. And I've just started to make some big, I say final images, but of course these all are as well, but some ones on cradled wood. So I'm not sure how they're going to turn out, but we'll see. And then this last one is a kind of a moving on from that, but it's the same thing. It's, you can see the marbling, I think, really clearly here. So this was a sheet of card. So I prime it first. It's just like single-sided card, you know, like brown one side, white shiny the other. So it's the brown side that's primed. And sometimes I underpaint it. Sometimes just primed white, and this one was just white. So it's dipped in a I think that was just in a bath thing again. I can't remember, it might be in the paddling pool. And again, I sometimes have to sit with what comes out for weeks before I see something, and not make an intervention too soon, because I have kind of wrecked some things, and I think that's the other thing that's happens with this process. I kind of, okay, there might be this really juicy, nice bit that's happened, and then I just get fed up, and I can't see anything, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I just paint all over it and what have you. But there are figures in here, some people leaning over this river and the land, planting and growing things. And I think actually this might be almost before the Cracker project. I think they might be almost a precursor to that. But how are we doing for time? Because I've kind of got into my slides, and I'm just wanted to say
You're fine, Jan. Carry on. It's all good.
Okay. How many more minutes have I got, Jonathan?
Another 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. And I wanted really to kind of speak about the neurodiversity side more, because I think something that people assume, if you're, there's this assumption that there's a high level of creativity, and I think that it's quite a difficult thing to assume in people, because we all have a creative mind, and it can really scupper us. And I think part of the challenge in a lot of neurodiverse conditions is to kind of find out which bit of it you can use. And also kind of, I'm well into my 50s now, and kind of you can look back and figure out which bits worked and which bits didn't, in terms of career or painting or whatever. And I think addressing these issues in the paintings has really helped me over the last couple of years. I had quite a lot of therapy last year, and working with this crackerjack project was a really important part of that, because it developed this, I nearly said some art bollocks language, I'm just going to say it, some visual language. No, it is important, but things like the hands and the cabbages, and they kind of came out in my discussions in therapy as to what they meant and why they were important, and can I use them to explore something in the painting. And thankfully, this process that I've been using allows you get such a rich amount of pattern and stuff to work with. It's almost like the what's in my head, if that makes sense. This like explosion of gloop and stuff, and it's like, okay, well, there's all this stuff going on in your head all the time. How can we make sense of it? Oh, I can see this there, I can see that there. And what I'm trying to achieve in my painting, I think, over the next couple of years is more of going with what I've got and representing, like, did you ever want to see that film, Everything All Together All at Once? Because that's how my head feels most of the time. And to kind of encapsulate that in the paintings and go and really work with the complexity, but somehow find some sort of meaning, which I think, again, is probably what we're all trying to do in paint. I have kind of, I did, when things weren't working well a couple of years ago, I did start doing some crime fiction writing. So if anyone ever discovers one of my cozy murder mysteries on Amazon, and I just wrote, because another thing I've learned about myself is that I need a project, and if the project's over, I am quite at sea. I think maybe that's the same for everyone, but I do seem to need quite a high level of challenge and a constant feeding of new challenges. So when writing's over, I came back to the painting, and it really did help, I think, the painting to come together better. I can see, interestingly, I don't know whether you guys can, but I can see my earlier work in these three particular paintings, because there's still the kind of quite toned down palette, the quite soft palette, quite kind of tonal work. But when I think about where I was, where are we? That's only 4 or 5 years ago. I think things have moved on, and I think that's okay. I worry that, because of course they still show this TV program, that people will go, oh, well, like her work, we're going to go and find out about her, and then they look at what I'm making now, and of course that's 8 years ago. I've moved on, and if you look at artists historically, they tend, they move on, and in the show in Elysium particularly, you can see that people make different stuff. They might move to working in 3D or in film or in collage or whatever. So I think, I'm more comfortable with the fact that things have moved on. I love these 3 paintings, but I equally love the work that I'm making here. Oh, and I have a cat coming on screen, Jonathan. So I'm going to stop talking